I didn't plan to lose myself. But when I started reading The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli, something inside me shifted. It was like staring into a mirror that didn't just reflect who I was. It showed me who I could become if I stopped playing by society's rules. For centuries, people have called Machiavelli evil, manipulative, even soulless. But as I turned each page, I realized maybe he wasn't teaching people how to be monsters. Maybe he was teaching people how to see monsters before they destroy you. That thought haunted me. So I decided to try something insane. For 30 days, I would live by Machiavelli's philosophy. Every decision, every conversation, every reaction, guided not by emotion or morality, but by strategy. I wanted to know what it truly felt like to think like Machiavelli, to see how the world changes when you stop trying to be good and start trying to be effective. The first thing I learned, Machiavelli doesn't just change how you think, he changes what you notice. Suddenly, I saw it everywhere. The silent power games at work, the manipulative smiles, the subtle flattery that hides a knife behind the back. People weren't honest, they were tactical. And the ones who seemed the nicest? They were often the most dangerous. That realization shattered something in me. Because once you see the game, you can never unsee it. Machiavelli believed that humans are driven not by virtue, but by self-interest, a quiet hunger to control outcomes in their favor. He wrote, "Men are ungrateful, fickle, liars and deceivers. They shun danger and are greedy for profit." Brutal words, but when you start observing, you realize he wasn't wrong. Every day during this experiment, I became less emotional and more analytical. When people spoke, I didn't listen to their words. I listened to their motives. When they smiled, I asked myself, what do they want? At first it felt dark, cold even. But then, something fascinating happened. I started feeling calm. Because when you see through manipulation, it loses its power over you. I realized how easily people are influenced, not because they're weak, but because they crave approval. They give away their power in small doses, a compliment here, a compromise there, until they wake up one day wondering why they feel invisible. Machiavelli would call that a failure of awareness. He'd say the world isn't cruel, it's just strategic. Those who refuse to play the game are often the ones who get played, so I started testing it. In conversations, I practiced silence, letting others reveal themselves. At work, I observed how flattery shaped decisions more than facts. In arguments, I stopped reacting emotionally and responded with precision, short, calm, and controlled. The effect was instant. People started treating me differently. More seriously, more carefully. It was as if by removing emotional noise, I became unpredictable. And in a world of predictable people, unpredictability is power. But there was something deeper happening too. Something I didn't expect. By following Machiavelli's principles, I began to confront my own masks. I saw how much of my kindness was actually fear of rejection, how much of my patience was disguised people-pleasing, and how often I said yes when I wanted to say no, not because I was good, but because I was scared of being disliked. That's the paradox of Machiavelli's philosophy. It's not about controlling others. It's about mastering yourself before others can. He wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." I took that personally. I started looking at who I surrounded myself with, who drained me, who inspired me, who subtly steered my emotions. I realized my environment wasn't neutral. It was sculpting my identity every single day. So I made a decision. For these 30 days, I would choose strategy over sympathy, clarity over comfort, and truth over approval. Not because I wanted to become ruthless, but because I wanted to become free. And freedom, I was starting to see, has a price. The deeper I went into Machiavelli's mind, the more I realized that morality and manipulation often wear the same mask. That's what made him so dangerous and so fascinating. He wasn't telling people to be cruel. He was saying, the world rewards those who understand cruelty. By the end of week 1, I wasn't sure if I was learning to control others, or if I was finally learning to stop being controlled. In the next phase of this 30-day journey, something unexpected would happen. A test that would force me to use Machiavelli's principles not in theory, but in the raw battlefield of human relationships. And that's when I realized, mind control isn't about others at all. It's about the war within your own mind. The second week changed everything. Until this point, Machiavelli's philosophy was just an intellectual experiment. Ideas scribbled in a notebook, quiet reflections on human behavior. But life has a strange way of testing what you claim to understand. And that test came faster than I expected. It started with a small confrontation. A coworker, someone who often challenged me publicly, tried to undermine me again during a meeting. Normally, I would defend myself, argue, try to prove my point. But that day, I remembered one of Machiavelli's most unsettling ideas. Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake. So, I said nothing. I just watched him, calm, unmoving, unreadable. He grew louder, more emotional, his arguments weaker with every sentence. And then, like a blade slicing through silence, the realization hit me. Power doesn't always speak. Sometimes, it just watches. When the meeting ended, people didn't look at him. They looked at me. I hadn't said a word. Yet somehow, I had won. That was the first time I truly felt what Machiavelli meant by control. It wasn't about domination. It was about discipline. The ability to restrain yourself when every cell in your body wants to react. Machiavelli believed the greatest strength lies in understanding human weakness. And he was right. The more I observed people, friends, co-workers, strangers, the more I noticed patterns. The loudest ones sought validation. The kindest ones sought safety. And the cruelest ones, they feared irrelevance. Everyone was trying to control something. Their image, their influence, their sense of worth. And behind every act of power was insecurity wearing armor. That's when I realized that Machiavellian mind control isn't about manipulation. It's about awareness, seeing what drives people, not what they say drives them. When you learn to see that, the world changes shape. You stop reacting to the surface. You start reading the soul. But awareness comes with a cost. Because once you begin to see motives clearly, trust becomes complicated. Every conversation feels layered. You start wondering, do they care about me, or what I can offer? That question haunted me for days. Machiavelli warned rulers not to rely on affection, but on utility. People stay loyal as long as they benefit. It sounds cruel, but in truth, it's not far from reality. Most relationships, personal or professional, exist within invisible contracts of mutual benefit. We like to call it love, friendship, or loyalty, but remove what each person gains and watch how quickly it fades. At first, this made me cynical. But then, strangely, it brought me peace. Because when you stop expecting people to be pure, you stop being disappointed when they're not. You accept human nature and start working with it, not against it. In those weeks, silence became my greatest weapon. Not because it intimidated others, but because it gave me clarity. When you don't rush to fill silence, people do it for you. They reveal their fears, their secrets, their weaknesses. They confess without realizing it. It's fascinating how people can't handle quiet. They mistake it for judgment, or superiority, or disinterest. But to Machiavelli, silence was a throne. It gives you control without effort. During one conversation, a friend tried to pull me into drama, gossip, emotional traps, subtle manipulation, but I just listened, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just letting him talk. By the end, he said something revealing. "You're hard to read now." And that's when I understood. Mystery is magnetic. People fear what they can't predict. They respect what they can't easily manipulate. Machiavelli once said, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. I never truly understood that until now. Fear, in this sense, wasn't terror. It was respect without intimacy. A form of psychological distance that protects your energy and preserves your influence. But Machiavellian control has another layer, one most people ignore. He wrote about the power of perception, how the appearance of virtue can be more valuable than virtue itself, because the world judges not by truth but by presentation. So I began to test that too. I started dressing more sharply, speaking less, holding eye contact longer, using fewer words but with more precision. I didn't seek attention. I let attention come to me. And within days, the shift was visible. People listened more. They hesitated before interrupting. Even those who once dismissed me began to adjust their tone. It was unsettling how easily perception creates power, not power born of aggression, but of presence. Machiavelli was right. People don't follow truth. They follow confidence, cloaked as certainty. Yet deep down, I began to sense something darker. The more I embodied Machiavelli's world, the more detached I felt from my own emotions. I was calm, yes, but also cold. I had control, but I wondered, was I losing connection? This philosophy demanded a price, emotional distance for mental clarity. And somewhere inside I began to wonder, is it possible to be powerful and still be human? As the 30 days continued, that question became my obsession. Because Machiavelli's method was working shockingly well. But I started to fear what it might cost me if I kept going. The final 2 weeks would answer that question, in a way that shook me more than I expected. It wouldn't be about strategy anymore. It would be about identity, and what happens when you start becoming the mask you wear. By the 3rd week, something unexpected began to happen. It wasn't about the people around me anymore. It was about me. At first I thought I was mastering the art of control. I spoke less, revealed nothing, reacted strategically. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling anything. It was as if the more I understood human behavior, the less I wanted to be human. Machiavelli had warned that emotion clouds judgment, that mercy and morality weaken leaders. So I suppressed everything: empathy, guilt, even joy. But the silence inside me grew louder. When you strip away emotion to understand others, you also strip away the very warmth that connects you to them. One night, I caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. My eyes looked steady, cold, focused, but lifeless. That's when it hit me. I hadn't just been studying manipulation, I was becoming it. It's easy to believe that Machiavelli's philosophy is about power over others, but in reality, it's about power over yourself. And that power can become addictive. The thrill of control, of predicting outcomes, of watching people bend unknowingly to your calm, is intoxicating. You start to feel invincible. But what you don't realize is that you're building a prison, one made not of bars, but of masks. I started noticing how much of my energy went into maintaining that control, how every pause, every look, every calculated silence became a performance. Even when I was alone, I found it hard to switch off. My thoughts were still tactical, my emotions filtered through strategy. It was exhausting. Machiavelli once said, "Men are so simple and so much creatures of circumstance that the deceiver will always find someone ready to be deceived." He was right. But I had become the deceiver and the deceived. I had tricked myself into believing that being in control was the same as being strong. The turning point came unexpectedly. A close friend called, upset about something personal. Normally, I'd comfort them, listen, offer warmth. But that day, my brain didn't reach for empathy. It reached for strategy. How should I respond? What should I say to appear supportive without losing composure? Halfway through the conversation, they stopped and said quietly, "You sound distant. Are you even here?" That hit harder than I expected, because in that moment I realized I wasn't. I had become so obsessed with control that I had lost connection. I wasn't living life. I was analyzing it. And that's when Machiavelli's philosophy turned from a lesson into a warning. See, the shadow side of understanding human nature is that you start to mistrust it. When you see people's motives clearly, it's hard to believe in innocence again. You stop laughing freely because you're too busy decoding subtext. You stop being moved by kindness because you wonder what's behind it. That's when you understand what Machiavelli never fully admitted: power isolates. And the higher you climb in control, the more alone you become. For centuries, rulers and leaders have admired his philosophy because it makes them sharp, ruthless even. But few realize that behind Machiavelli's brilliance was tragedy. He was exiled, betrayed, and forgotten by the very systems he tried to understand. He wrote The Prince not from a throne, but from loneliness. A man who understood power but had lost his place within it. In that realization, something cracked open inside me. Maybe true control isn't about suppressing emotion. Maybe it's about directing it. Maybe the purpose of power isn't to dominate others, but to master yourself enough to stay human in a world that isn't. So I started to experiment again, but differently this time. Instead of suppressing emotion, I observed it. Instead of analyzing people to manipulate them, I studied them to understand them. And the difference was profound. When you stop trying to win every interaction, you start noticing something deeper: authenticity. The pauses in people's voices, the tremor of truth when they talk about pain, the unspoken fear behind arrogance. You stop seeing people as pawns and start seeing them as mirrors, reflecting parts of you you've ignored. That's when I remembered Jung's words, oddly echoing Machiavelli in their own way. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The unconscious, the part of us that seeks control, validation, dominance, that's the same force Machiavelli described, just in political language. Both he and Jung were exploring the same truth. If you don't understand your own nature, you will be ruled by it. By week 3, the experiment had stopped being about manipulation and turned into something much more personal: self-awareness. The battlefield wasn't out there. It was inside me. And that's the paradox. To master others, you must first master yourself. But once you truly master yourself, you lose the desire to control anyone else. Machiavelli taught me how power works, but he also showed me its limits. You can control perception, behavior, and outcomes, but you can't control the soul. And if you forget that, you win the game, but lose the player. As I moved into the final week, I wanted to know one thing. Could I take what I'd learned, this cold, clear understanding of power, and merge it with warmth, empathy, and authenticity, without losing either side? Could Machiavelli's darkness and humanity's light coexist? That was the final test, and the answer would surprise me more than anything else in those 30 days. The final week began in silence. No experiments, no strategies, no mental notes. Just stillness. It felt strange at first, like a soldier lowering his weapon after a long war. For 30 days my mind had been trained to predict, calculate, and dominate. Now I wanted to do something that felt almost forbidden, to let go. But it wasn't easy. Every time I tried to relax into a conversation, that same voice would whisper, "Be careful. Don't reveal too much. Keep the upper hand." That's when I realized, control isn't something you hold. It's something that holds you. And I understood why so many people, after tasting power, can never go back to peace. Because peace feels like weakness when your soul has grown addicted to control. I began my mornings differently that week. Instead of planning how to win the day, I watched people, without analyzing them. The barista at the coffee shop smiled, genuinely, without agenda. A stranger helped an old man cross the road, with no audience watching. Tiny acts of humanity, invisible to strategy. And for the first time, I saw it. The power Machiavelli never talked about. The power of not needing control. Because when you no longer seek to manipulate, your presence becomes magnetic. You stop chasing outcomes, and life starts bending toward you naturally. Not because you're controlling it, but because you're aligned with it. That's the paradox Machiavelli never lived to see. The ultimate power isn't domination, it's detachment. One evening, I revisited The Prince. I flipped through its pages. The same sentences that once made me feel sharp, strategic, invincible. But now they read differently. Lines that once sounded like commands now felt like confessions. When Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both," I didn't hear arrogance anymore. I heard exhaustion. A man tired of betrayal, using reason to shield his broken heart. He wasn't teaching people how to be monsters. He was showing them how to survive among them. That realization hit me deeply, because in chasing Machiavelli's mindset, I had missed Machiavelli's pain. Power, in the end, is lonely, because the higher you rise, the fewer people you can trust. And when you treat every relationship like a chess game, you eventually forget what it feels like to simply play. But here's the twist. When you stop trying to control people, you begin to understand them. When you stop trying to win, you begin to connect. When you stop hiding behind the strategy, you meet yourself. In those final days, something profound began to shift inside me. The silence I once feared became grounding. The emotions I once suppressed returned, not as weakness, but as color. For the first time, I understood what it means to truly see people, not through manipulation, but through empathy. I realized that control and understanding aren't opposites. They're two halves of wisdom, the dark and the light. By the end of the 30th day, I wrote a single line in my journal. To control the world, master the self. To master the self, surrender to truth. That's what Machiavelli's experiment had taught me. Not how to dominate, but how to see. It's easy to read him and think his world was only about deceit and power. But hidden beneath the shadows of his words was something deeper. A mirror reflecting our own hunger for validation, our own fear of vulnerability. The truth is, everyone practices mind control, not with others, but with themselves. We control what we show, what we hide, what we allow ourselves to feel. We craft masks for survival, just like the princes and politicians Machiavelli studied. But the most dangerous mask is the one we forget we're wearing. After 30 days, I didn't become more powerful. I became more aware. I understood that Machiavelli wasn't the devil people make him out to be. He was a philosopher of survival, not cruelty. A man trying to teach how to think, not how to destroy. Because the truth about mind control isn't about others. It's about your own. Can you stay calm when your emotions beg you to react? Can you stay kind when manipulation would be easier? Can you face the darkness within you and still choose the light? That's the real challenge. And that's what 30 days with Machiavelli taught me. So here's what I learned. Condensed into one lesson. You can learn the art of control. You can master silence, strategy, and perception. But if you lose empathy, you lose the game entirely. True control isn't about bending others. It's about bending your own nature until it serves something higher. And when you reach that level, nothing outside can disturb you, because the kingdom you've conquered is within. And maybe that's what Machiavelli meant all along. Maybe he wasn't showing us how to manipulate others. Maybe he was daring us to understand ourselves, to face the cunning, the ambition, the hunger for control, and then rise above it. So if you ever try Machiavelli's mind control, don't do it to win over others. Do it to see what controls you. Because once you master that, the world changes. Or rather, you do. If this story made you reflect, if it made you question your own masks and motives, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's more to uncover, more shadows to explore, and more truths waiting to be seen.
Because the real game isn't out there. It's within.